Hi, everyone. We are just gathering here and we'll get started in a few minutes. I see we've got a number of folks on the call already. And what I'll do here to keep things interesting is I'll go through the boring but important part of the webinar, which is reading our disclaimer up front before we get started. So this webcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing should be considered the official opinion of Hashdex. This presentation is not an offer to buy or sell, nor is it a solicitation of an offer to buy or sell. Certain information contained herein constitutes forward-looking statements. Due to various risks and uncertainties, actual events or results and the performance of the products discussed may be substantially different from those reflected or contemplated in such forward-looking statements. For any product-specific information, please refer to the appropriate prospectus. And I think with that, we can go ahead and dive into our topic. We've got a great couple of panelists here today and a special guest, Staci Warden, the CEO of the Algorand Foundation. This is going to be, I think, a really interesting and timely discussion, given everything that's been going on in the crypto space, not just recently, but over the last few years or so. And before we get started, I do want to just give some quick background on Staci, and for those of you that aren't familiar, Staci is the CEO of the Algorand Foundation. Prior to joining the Algorand Foundation, she ran the global market development practice at the Milken Institute for 8 years, leading initiatives on capital market development, fintech for financial inclusion, crypto and blockchain solutions, and innovative finance of the for sustainable development goals. Before Milken, she ran JP Morgan's public sector practice for the EMEA group out of London. And before that, she was at NASDAQ and has also served senior roles at the US Treasury Department, and also spent time at the Center for Global Development and Harvard Institute for International Development. So quite an impressive background. And I think seeing that background, and now that you're involved in the crypto space, is something that I think is exciting for this space, because I think, one, you obviously bring a lot of institutional knowledge, some things that we'll discuss here momentarily. And also, I think it just is a demonstration of how this industry has evolved over the last 10, 15 years or so, that that it has really become an important part of the economy, and presenting some important solutions that we're going to discuss here today as well. And our other guest is our head of research at Hashdex, Pedro Lapenta. For those of you that might be on the call and aren't familiar with Hashdex, we are a global asset manager focused exclusively on crypto assets. So we have funds, ETFs, ETPs, across Latin America, Europe, in the US as well. And in addition to providing investors regulated access to these types of funds, crypto assets in these types of funds, one of our main goals is really to empower investors to help them confidently invest in this space. And Pedro and his team are kind of at the heart of that mission, in providing educational resources and analytical reports to help people really understand what the value of these individual assets are, and more broadly, the sectors within crypto assets, and then ultimately, crypto assets as a whole. So let's go ahead and kick things off. I think, as I mentioned, it's been an active time in crypto the last few weeks. I think there's never really a dull week, and this one has been no exception. We'll get into some of that later in terms of the regulatory outlook. But I did first want to give you, Staci, the opportunity to talk about the Algorand Foundation, some of the differences between the foundation and the token blockchain and Algorand Inc., and just give our audience kind of some history and background on your mission.
Well, thanks, Gerry. I want to thank you for kicking off with, how long I've been around and how old I am. Really appreciate that. But it's true, I've been around the block a few times. I've been in the public sector and the nonprofit sector, in traditional finance. Both, I ran an equity. I ran a microcap market at the NASDAQ, an equities market. And then when I was at JP Morgan, I ran a public sector business, client-facing business. So I feel like I've seen the elephant from a couple of different angles. And one thing that was, a common thread for things that I care about has always been a financial inclusion, access to capital, this deep belief that if entrepreneurs get access to capital, they'll use it properly and grow. And this is kind of, for me, what engenders economic growth in an economy, rather than a kind of a public sector, state-led solution, industrial policy type stuff. For me, it's just like much more about getting money into the hands of people that can use it productively. So that's been a little bit of a narrative theme for me across all of these jobs. And crypto, of course, fits quite well into that. And the very decentralized nature of the blockchain, the idea that people can kind of, create value, get credit for their value, understand value, be able to trace value, be able to monetize value that is not otherwise monetized, be able to create liquidity in things that were otherwise illiquid. These are all kinds of things that juice, to me, the prime the pump for economic activity. And from economic activity comes growth, and from growth comes, improved welfare. So that's a little bit like the broad thesis. Algorand itself, though, was founded by a famous cryptographer, a guy named Silvio Macaulay. He's a professor at MIT, tenured professor, sort of won the Turing Award in computer science for a couple of things, actually, that the cryptocurrency ecosystem uses more broadly. Two in particular, one is called zero knowledge proofs, and the other is called verifiable random functions. And so he had these ideas. He did not have the idea to attach money to them necessarily. So this is some of where the genius of Satoshi Nakamoto came. But he watched this ecosystem grow using his primitives. And I think he thought, well, I could probably build a pretty good blockchain myself, actually. And so based on his name and his credibility, he was immediately able to raise some money. And they built this protocol. It went live in 2019. And they are Algorand Inc., which is, to your first question, how are we different? They run this protocol. They are all software engineers, cryptographers, systems architects. Like, they're all like brainiacs sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts, building this thing, which has never gone down for a second since it's been live. And at the foundation, we are based in Singapore. We're a Singapore entity. We are in charge with the cultivation of this ecosystem. And so we are also in charge of our sort of decentralization pathway as well. Because as you know, the idea behind all of this is to turn these over to the community eventually. So we care about things like how happy the community is, the protocols, the tokenomics, all of that stuff, the governance, we run the governance. And so all of that is, I call it in a word, like the fun stuff, and they do the hard stuff. So that's like the TLDR and how to think about the difference between the two of us. And I run the foundation, as you said earlier.
That's great. I think, we at Hashdex are big believers in decentralized protocols and decentralized finance, DeFi in particular. So, Pedro, do you want to speak a little bit about kind of our work in that space and kind of how we view the investment thesis around DeFi in particular, and how these decentralized technologies have kind of grown to become, of interest to investors?
Sure. Thanks, Gerry. And well, yeah, just going back a little bit, Hashdex launched the first crypto ETF a few years ago. And as part of the product development of the company in 2022, we launched a few thematic indexes. As one of them was the DeFi, the Decentralized Finance ETF, which tracks the DeFi Composite Index by CF benchmarks. And it's basically a basket of tokens for some of the large, DeFi protocols that, people are aware of, such as Uniswap, Aave, Curve, Maker, Synthetics, Compound, Yearn, right?
Folks Finance.
Folks Finance. We will be. You could be one day as part of the index, and this index also provides exposure to the broader value chain of DeFi, not only the protocols themselves, but like support protocols such as Chainlink, the Graph, and the layer one themselves, such as Ethereum, and eventually given custodian requirements and exchange requirements, eventually other layer ones such as Algorand, right? But to your question, these solutions, the DeFi solution, this pretty much what drove me somehow to crypto is that when I saw, what these decentralized applications being run on decentralized protocols or databases could do to the world, right? And this go back to to the smart contract platforms such as Algorand or Ethereum, right? That are able to run these pieces of codes independently. And this is what DeFi has done, and this is one of the primitives, and one of the things that the first use case, real use cases that crypto has brought to the world, and basically, in a nutshell, our thesis is that what we're buying today, once you invest in these tokens, is you're betting that these solutions, for instance, and pretty much this these solutions, these smart contract-based solutions, they're bringing traditional finance to the digital world, such as intermediation of lending and borrowing, of swaps, of transactions, of even insurance and many other innovations that have come out of these smart contract-based solutions. So basically, you're betting that these solutions, which they promise, and they've shown this so far, but they promise to be very efficient in eliminating intermediaries, and enhancing accessibility, as Staci was putting, and this has the potential to address a very huge global market. And so you're betting on an early technology that can be part of this bigger market that is traditional finance, the way that we know it in the world. So that's what we do in this DeFi, and this is I think one of the use cases of crypto that has very, very, very large potential in the future, and Algorand is part of this as well. We have several DeFi protocols sitting on the Algorand blockchain, getting traction, getting adoption, and people are using worldwide. So it's just, I think it's a very huge market. It's just beginning.
Well, Pedro, I think you said you came from an equities background, and I used to run an equities market for the NASDAQ. And, the thing about equities markets is they're just like the craziest things. I mean, on the one hand, you have all of these prop traders that care about like gigaseconds. I mean, I don't even know the word actually for the minute amount of time that they care about. Cables are exactly the same length from data feeds. They're all on property of the exchanges. Like
of the exchange, yeah.
Even a split of a split second further away from anybody else. But then the whole thing closes down at 4:30 and takes the weekend off. You know what I mean? It's like bananas in certain ways. And where a DeFi ecosystem, it's 24/7. There's no like, oh, let's wait for the opening bell on Monday, right? It's always on. It's 24/7. And I think there's a lot of very interesting technical value propositions, but that is really kind of the most fundamental one, that things happen instantaneously and they happen around the clock.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's we joke that it's the markets have shut down for the week in traditional markets, and in crypto we're still Tuesday night, and then there's still a lot to go, and all these innovation that has come out of these liquidations, the delivery versus payment, the atomic settlements. And this is something that the traditional, I think, in my opinion, the traditional world is beginning to see the value of it, and it's been tested worldwide. You see major banks, major corporations, studying the technology, putting teams together, working it out and see what they can, how this technology can be applied to their day-to-day business. How can they, reduce their costs at the end of the day, be more productive, and it's it's just a very one of the very first use cases that crypto is bringing to society, and I think it's going to have a big impact going forward.
Yeah, and the customers at Silicon Valley Bank certainly understand the value proposition as they waited all weekend long to see if their wire transfers on Friday actually managed to go through or not, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask maybe you, Pedro and Staci, get your thoughts on this as well. But obviously, DeFi was a very hot topic in 2021, particularly the DeFi summer of 2021, and a lot happened in 2022 that had people questioning the value of crypto in general, and maybe DeFi more specifically. So, Pedro, in terms of the current investment case. Has 2022 kind of disrupted that for looking out over the longer term, or are we seeing things now in this new year? Not so new. We're almost halfway through the year, but are we seeing things now? It's scary. Yeah. In 2023, have we seen things that are kind of bolstering the case for DeFi? Are people becoming more kind of interested in these decentralized protocols and how they can actually impact the financial system?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, whenever you have a market correction, participants, the media, everyone kind of doubts the thesis and they keep raising questions, which is legitimate, right? But what we just taking a step back and remember, 2021 we had the DeFi summer, booming volume, booming new protocols being launched, and this is part of the innovation. This is the permissionless. These are permissionless systems. Anyone can launch smart contracts on blockchains, and the legal aspect of DeFi, where you get pieces of software from here and another piece from there, and you bundle them all together, coming up with a new solution, right? So we saw an explosion of usage in 2021. Market prices went through the roof, and then we saw a tremendous correction in 2022. But it was not isolated, right? It was a global, global correction in bonds as an asset class, in equities as an asset class, something that we had never seen in many years, right? Both happening at the same time in the same year. But there are some, I think, great takeaways from the 2022 blow up, right? I don't think it killed the thesis at all. I think it reinforced. We were able to see the good things of it, of the technology. The market was able to clean up the bad actors, clean up bad practices. Remember, this is still very early technology that is still being regulated. So everything is new. The reactions are new. The solutions are new. So it's kind of expected, something that grows very, very fast, to go bust like this. But the good thing that we can take it away from 2022, for instance, is that mathematics still matters, right? Remember Terra Luna, one case that went bad in 2022. It wasn't anything related to the technology itself. It was just bad, mathematical design of an algorithmic stable coin, right? It created this reflexivity mechanism that drove the Luna token value to zero and the Terra, the stable coin, to zero. But it wasn't a technological problem. The technology worked as it was supposed to, as it was written on the code, right? Celsius, the Voyager issues that were happening in 2022 were pretty much stratified issues. Like they over leveraged, they didn't have proper risk management controls. They conducted bad business and they went bust. And then you see the good part of it, which was for instance the DeFi again, all these DeFi protocols that are open source, right? You can see the code. People can expect what's going to do in certain conditions, and they reacted as they were supposed to. They worked just fine, So the technology was put to test, right? There was, a huge number of transactions during this very small amount of time, liquidations right and center, and these protocols worked perfectly, showcasing the technology. It was put to test. So and then came FTX, right? FTX was, again, it was a TradFi problem, bad risk management, just and bad behavior, and it was punished by the market just as it's supposed to be, and obviously I think it kicked a new cycle in crypto, right? I think that was the turning point where regulators worldwide kind of woke up and said, okay, we need to kind of help these people navigate this. This is growing way too fast, and we're seeing that all over the place. Some places going more proactive, some places going more reactive. Brazil, for instance, is going super proactive. I think the US is a bit reactive so far, but we're optimistic over the long run. Europe, has just put out a very comprehensive regulatory oversight, but the technology is there. The technology worked, and predictability and transparency was tested and it worked. So I'm very. I think it was more positive in 2022 than negative, despite the market corrections. I don't know if Staci sees this way, but I think there are more positive takeaways from 2022 than 2021.
Yeah, I think in 2022, DeFi held up exactly as advertised. The fundamental value proposition for DeFi is that you have to over collateralize, and then you can borrow some portion of the assets that you put up as collateral. There's no credit creation, so you borrow less than you put up as collateral. And when your collateral starts crashing in value, you do not call somebody in DeFi and say, hey, I'm at a golf vacation this weekend. Can I just have until Tuesday to like post my margin requirements again? Look, you don't call somebody and say, hey, we went to college together and I'd really appreciate you doing me a favor. The DeFi protocol liquidates your collateral and the lender is made whole. And during that time period, lenders through DeFi protocols were made whole, even though the market was crashing in Terra Luna. So I think it was, I think I might dispute your premise a little. I think it was a very good showing for DeFi at the time. Where I think we particularly got in trouble, though, were with institutions that, on the one hand, pretended that they were like regulated institutions. They used bank-like words. They used words like custody and APY. Those words mean something in a regulated context. And so customers expect things like their assets are segregated if it's custody, for example. But they also were very kind of crypto adjacent. So they pretended to be also very crypto and cool, when in fact they weren't DeFi, they were run by individuals. And so these protocols, these lending protocols like Celsius, for example, they were pretending to be both, and they were a bit caught in the middle. And this is where all the trouble happened this year. And then FTX, of course, was just fraud, alleged fraud. So that's a separate category of its own.
The one topic that I think I don't want to get too far along before Staci, I give you more of an opportunity to expand on is financial inclusivity. And I think if you look at decentralized technologies, that is arguably one of the strongest arguments for the benefits of many decentralized technologies. And I think that gets lost in both bull and bear markets oftentimes. And so I'd be interested in kind of your perspectives on, one, how you see blockchain-based technologies creating a more kind of equitable, accessible financial marketplace, and then also more specifically what Algorand is doing to make this happen.
I think just to stay on the same topic a little bit, one of the very interesting and ironic things about DeFi and code, written in code, is that, if you're playing chicken and you tie your hand to the steering wheel, you tie your steering wheel in the straight position, the other guy is going to give up because you have taken away your ability to do something to turn that car over, out of the way, right? You've tied your hands. And DeFi does that in a very interesting way as well, especially when it can talk to real world assets. So for example, a very interesting, and there's a lot of financial inclusion stories, but this one's a little bit different. So that's why I'm leading with it. So your audience is maybe hearing something outside of like the top three that they hear all the time, is if you are, if you make lease payments on a car, and those lease payments are on the blockchain, and the car will not turn on unless the blockchain pings it through an IoT sensor. Hey, the lease payment was made. The lease payment was made. You can start today. They're current. As soon as you don't make a lease payment, the car will not start. That, ironically, is better for financial inclusion, because then you can go and lease a car even if you have terrible credit history. Maybe you have terrible credit history because your mother died and you spent all your money trying to blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But me as a car dealership, I am willing to give you that car because I know I don't have to send, two guys out in a Pinto with baseball bats to come after you. I don't have to incur that cost. The car just simply won't turn on. So I think that is one very sort of interesting way in which this kind of code as law can help with financial inclusion. Other ways are, and this is, to me, this is the one that everybody talks about, but it's so fundamental, is the ability to make micropayments. The payment system in the US in particular, but also globally, is so antiquated. I think Brazil is one of the important exceptions to that rule of countries that are trying to do something about this, is so antiquated that there is just no way you can make a 50-cent payment to somebody or a 25-cent payment to somebody. The costs of this are so enormous. And the credit card rails that take, up to 3.5% sometimes on transactions just does not allow small business to flourish at all. And the blockchain protocol, especially a protocol like Algorand, for example, of course, I'm going to say that, but it has very low transaction fees that you could send, $100 million with Algorand for a sub-penny transaction fee. But much more importantly than that, you could send 10 cents for a sub-penny transaction fee, which means that you might be willing to do that. That means that you might be willing to monetize things that you would never think of charging people before. You can create value that is trapped currently. And then the third piece, I think, of financial inclusion is the idea that you can take big chunky assets that you need big balance sheets and big investors to be able to invest in them. They are the privilege of the accredited investor only. And you can slice those things up into tiny, tiny little pieces that retail investors can then invest in. So a good example on Algorand is a platform called Lofty AI, where they take rental properties. Now, rental property income is the privilege of an accredited investor. But now, if you can buy, $10 or $50 of a worth of a rental property, they are all, by the way, completely decentralized. They're set up as DAOs, property by property. Then you can have your rental income, maybe only a couple of dollars, but it is commensurate with the investment that you put in. And now you have passive rental income. For the first time, that's bringing liquidity to the market, and it's also allowing many more investors to participate. And by the way, on Lofty AI, how often do you think they get that rental income? Do you think they get it at the end of the month? Of course not. It's Web3. They get daily. It's continuous finance. They get those rental payments daily. So it's so exciting for financial inclusion, just because of the lowering of the cost base that enables you to do so many different things, and the disintermediation of expensive people.
Those are
I've
great.
stunned you into silence.
No, those are great ways and actually ways that I personally have not thought about in terms of the technology's potential here. But I think while we're kind of talking about projects, it would be, I think, useful maybe to talk about some of the projects, Staci, you guys are most excited about, that have the most potential, and that you see, as kind of great sort of solutions to problems that we're facing right now.
Okay, Gerry, do not make me pick a favorite child, because I get in deep trouble for doing this.
Love them all equally.
Yes, I love them. I love them all. I love them all equally. But maybe I'll pick out. I'll say a couple that are in Latin American based. So one is this is truly one of my favorite projects, because it's such a pain point for me, and I am sure for all of your audience. And this is going to be hard. This is a hard one that they are tackling. These guys have a lot of courage, but they're making incredible progress. They are tokenizing airline tickets and creating a secondary market for airline tickets. These guys, Travelex, are out of Argentina. And so imagine you're in the United States, and there's a sale on airline tickets, and you're a college freshman, and you buy tickets home for Thanksgiving every year. You just buy them all 4 years, your airline ticket home. But then, your sophomore year, you meet a guy, you don't want to go home for Thanksgiving. You want to go maybe to like your boyfriend's house. Then you don't have these fees, and you're not punished, because you can just sell that ticket between that location A and location B on the secondary market with the good grace of the airline. Completely, the partnership is with the airline, and you're not intermediated back through just paying a penalty fee, losing your money, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea of a secondary market in airline tickets, I think, is like pretty potentially revolutionary. Another thing that's interesting is just the idea of being able to monetize income streams. So one company, the founder lives in Brazil. I don't know if it's headquartered or if it's registered in Brazil. It's called Opulus, which is a music royalty app. So the idea that you can now finance the costs that you have now as an artist by kind of securitizing, but in a much more elegant way, securitizing your revenues from your music royalties that you know upfront. And of course, they're called MFTs for music fungible tokens. Very, very kind of clever token. But it's a more interesting way to do that kind of asset-based finance, I would say. And then another example, also out of Argentina, is something called AgroToken, and they are again, tokenizing future revenue. So when you get your crops, when you're actually in the fall, when your crops come due, you can have that money. You can have access to that money in the spring when you're trying to plant. And so this idea of being able to use markets to smooth your income stream over time is these are some very interesting use cases for me. Also, by the way, quite important for financial inclusion, of course. There are many more though that I could talk about, both in the creator space and in the agricultural space and industrial space. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to talk about these use cases because, especially coming off of the year that was 2022 and the attention around crypto, so much of it being negative, I think there was a lot of people were ignoring kind of these real world use cases that are going on. And I mean, just thinking about like institutional adoption in the last few weeks, you have Nike announcing new NFT program, Google Cloud partnering to help scale Bitcoin, all these types of things that are going on in the background, I think that you're not necessarily reading about if you're reading the financial news. So thank you for sharing those. And I want to shift gears maybe a little bit just to talk about kind of the regulatory landscape broadly. Obviously, we are all familiar with the lawsuits from the SEC this week, and I don't know how constructive it is to really talk about those, or what's a security, what's a commodity. I think that what might be more helpful for those that are listening in right now is to talk about like the broader regulatory landscape globally, right? So Lapenta, Pedro mentioned earlier that he the MICA in Europe, Brazil, I'm not from Brazil, but I've just been like astonished at how proactive their government has been with regards to adopting these technologies and giving people a framework for how to operate in the space. So Staci, I know you have some background in government and policy in particular. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts and kind of the direction that the US is going relative to what's going on globally.
I think broadly, the efforts from MICA are viewed by the ecosystem more broadly as very positive, maybe stringent in certain ways, but there's been a kind of something put down that people can react to. And I think that's very much appreciated. And I think the idea that the European Union can kind of come together on something like that with so many players is also quite impressive to folks, I think. Other really, really forward-thinking regulatory regimes around payments are also quite impressive to me. In Brazil, I would count as one of those, just trying to figure out a way that faster payments can be made. And I think there in payments is one area where the United States is also really waking up now in a call to action, trying to get the Fed Faster Payments Task Force. I was invited to be on the Fed Faster Payments Task Force in 2013, just to give you an idea of how long these things, can take. But the idea that, money can be, held for 3 days, that doesn't matter to 50% of the population, but it's existential for the other 50% of the population, right? That your paycheck could be held up and not clear, right? So getting these like fundamental basics right, I think, is really catching the world by storm. And I think the US is also, I wouldn't say they're at the forefront, but I think they're trying to catch up there. And that will be a very good thing for financial inclusion in particular. And I think, as other countries make strides, and there could be some second mover advantages for the US as well, just kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. The issue is that it's kind of a large economy to stay a little bit behind and not lead, from the front. So I think that's, it's somewhat unfortunate, but I think it's the regulators, they all talk to each other. They're very, they learn from each other. They want to do the right thing. So I think I would love to see some global harmonization. And to me, it doesn't matter who's out front doing it, right? We just got to kind of figure it out, right? And get some clarity around the thing.
Yeah. Pedro, do you think there are lessons from Brazil in particular that can be applied to, the US in terms of how the US is thinking about these technologies? I know you guys have done a lot of thinking around that, the digital real and those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, Brazil has had an innovation agenda led by the central bank for quite some time. And it not only involves, blockchain technology, it involves, instant payment, as Staci was saying, and also the open banking thing. That's kind of a worldwide thing. And Brazil has delivered on the instant payment. Several countries, we're in constant contact with the central bank. We talk to them all the time, especially now with the Real Digital, which is a platform that's very interesting. And they've been, approached by several countries, to lead discussions to help them navigate how to implement such an impressive, instant payment system in such a short period of time. That's what happened here in Brazil. There are currently 500, 600 million addresses, or in the instant payment system. And now Brazil, since we've delivered the instant payment solution and the open finance solution, which is obviously underdeveloped, but it's moving forward. It was kind of natural, this is their words, not mine. It was kind of natural to approach the next phase of financial innovation, which, per their own words, and in this audience here, people will understand, it's the programmability of money, right? So Staci touched a little bit about it on her speeches and today, but this is the next phase of the financial innovation agenda. How we're going to program money, and then how can this bring access to the masses? How can we reduce costs? How can we reduce friction? And the approach that they took was, because there's all this maxi discussion on crypto that no government, no intervention, no whatever, this approach that but if we want this technology to be global, to at the end, at the limit, reach every single person in the world, it's going to have to be regulated, right? The money is going to have to come from fiat world. So there are rules, that you have to follow here. And the approach that the central bank and the regulators locally here did was, let's involve the financial system. It's not, put them away. So that's how, the system here, it didn't react negatively, right? So they kind of got the buy-in from the financial system, and they're getting the banks involved, at the design of the project. The Real Digital is a platform, right? It obviously has the digital currency thing, but it's more of a platform, and it comes on a programmability technological stack, right? In the case of the Real Digital, they chose to be EVM compatible, or Ethereum virtual machine compatible, because they know there's an ecosystem there that has already developed with several solutions, and that they can pick the best out of it and use it.
Excuse me?
Within the system.
And pick the what? The
best out of what DeFi, right? What can be used out of DeFi, and use it in their system here. And they're going to initiate the project, as they say, by December 2024, tokenizing public debt. So this begins with the trillionaire market, and obviously it's a test. It's just a project, and it's going to be by mid next year. They're going to sit down and see if privacy can be met, know your customers, and all the regulatory framework that exists here in Brazil needs to be applied to these private or permission network, but it uses blockchain technology, and it uses programmability technology that in the future will be open up to public blockchains such as Ethereum and others. There's bridges, there's interoperability issues going on, obviously, that the technology is still evolving, but they are in parallel doing their own system using this blockchain technology.
Gerry, what does all this talk about Ethereum on this podcast?
No, but I mean, Ethereum was just an example, Stacy.
Or just one, one
But
example.
the idea is to open up for public blockchains, such as
Yeah.
Algorand. You know, there's
I
this
like
issue
to,
of obviously bridges.
I
Yeah.
think it's always good to go in alphabetical order when you're talking about these blockchains. I always say.
But anyway,
No, you're right.
this is
Pedro, you're
the
right.
story down here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, it's not the most sexy part, but its payments are fundamental. Everything starts with payments. If you don't have payments, you've got nothing. And so Brazil's done a really very, very, very impressive job of understanding and rolling out the importance of that.
And they've been approached by other countries, you know, help me navigate this. We want to do this, you know, and by major countries, by major developed countries. And I'm optimistic, you know, people I think finally woke up. They're seeing the value. They're seeing these use cases that Staci is, because it's difficult. Okay, oh, what's Bitcoin? Bitcoin is, you know, that's digital store of value. But what else does it do? You know, oh, they're kind of very limited. But then you see smart contract platforms, then you see the real world examples, just as, you know, Staci just laid out. You're like, oh, okay, now I see, you know, that this can be used. You know, this solves some real world problems. It brings, you know, costs down, and people understand the concept of digital property, right? A digital identity is one another, you know, big thing that's happening in blockchain technology. And but it's like the early stages of, we say that all the time with clients, and when we try to lay out the thesis, is like back then when the internet was being put together, you know, very early stages, you couldn't see everything that it was capable of, right? You just saw it and it was like, okay, this is something that might be big. And sometimes we just have to trust the process and trust that there's a lot of talent and a lot of capital, you know, chasing very big problems. And I think it's a great opportunity.
I want to remind people we've got a couple questions that have come through already, but I forgot to mention this earlier. If you do have questions, feel free to shoot them along at any point. We'll reserve a few minutes here at the end for those. But one thing I do want to maybe get back to a little bit is with regards to not just Algorand, but the space more broadly. What are kind of the recent developments in terms of scaling solutions and other types of things that will impact the adoption of these technologies that have, I'll ask both of you, Staci, maybe you first, but that have you really excited about this space for what is going to come, not necessarily this year, but maybe next year or the year after?
Yeah, you know, we've brought up a couple of themes here. One is inclusion and the other is privacy, and they don't always coexist. Sometimes they work against each other because you need to have some kind of AML KYC in order to comply with all the rules, as Pedro was saying, in Brazil, for example, or any financial system. And so, but at the same time, you're not going to put, you know, health records, or a corporate even is not going to put their payroll and their secret sauce and their corporate decision making on chain. So how do you have both of those things, and how do you thread the needle of the need for privacy and also the need to make sure that you check some of the boxes for a well-functioning? You're not, you know, for example, a financial player is not going to be able to use a public blockchain where even if the gas fees, to use your Ethereum example again, are paying in any way North Korea, right? It's a non-starter for a financial markets institution to do that, right? So you have to have both. And where I think we're going to be able to thread this, and where I think the savior kind of us all is going to lie in zero knowledge proofs. And a zero knowledge proof, if anybody needs kind of the 101 on it, is the ability to attest to the veracity of something without having to describe that thing. And so there are a couple of, you know, kind of well-known examples where you can prove that you know something is true, and you can prove it to be true. You can, and very succinctly. So a snark, the S in snark is succinct. That's very important. The proof needs to be succinct, and it needs to not, as a separate matter, not reveal anything about the underlying, right? And so if we can get this kind of technology rolled out broadly, I think it's going to be critical for the ecosystem as a whole. And I don't say that just because our founder was one of the 4 original authors of it. A lot of very interesting work has been done on it, but we're all going to use it to kind of get this balance right, I think. And then, of course, we're making more mundane, I would say, improvements. Algorand's latency is now, 3 seconds, and so you're done at 3 seconds. That is very different than a couple of years ago, or on a couple of other chains where you're waiting for a long time to know if your transaction actually went through or not. And that latency is very also important for these real world use cases. You've got to know when you're done. When you're done, you're done, you're done. And nobody's going to come back and say, oh, this fork is not the right fork, actually, blah, blah, even for a couple of seconds. Imagine a stable coin on 2 soft forks of a chain, even for a couple of seconds, that could be redeemed by 2 different people at the same time, like just not happening. And then transactions per second, of course, is also very important. But I think the core thing is going to be able to use these zero knowledge proofs to both protect information and to satisfy the requirements of regulators and others that it's the right kind of information.
That's great. I think we have a bunch of questions that have come through now, and actually I think most of them are not unrelated to the discussion we're just having. But since we only have about 10 or 12 minutes left, I'll go ahead and ask a couple of these. The first one is for you, Staci. Interested, the person is asking if you have thoughts on CBDCs affecting DeFi and specifically Algorand going forward. Is there a place for both?
I don't think that's an Algorand specific question, actually, but I think, CBDCs, it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be quite a long road for CBDCs. And they have some very existential decisions to make. Do they want to be wholesale? So do they want it to be a token based like cash, for example? But if something happens to your account, you get hacked, then it's gone. You've got no recourse, right? So do they want to make that decision exactly? Or do they want to use the banking sector and have it and keep it as a liability type framework where there's a liability to the bank? There are drawbacks to that too, because you don't want, and there are financial stability kind of questions with all of it too. If you make it too easy to go and interact with a central bank, what happens in a time of crisis if you get a banking panic out of the banking system and everybody wants to bank with the central bank? Also, do you want your central bank doing KYC around people using the currency? Last, I will say that the more, I'm not sure that I agree with programmable money as a CBDC. I mean, you want to be able to put payments into people's accounts, and you want to be able to do that with some ability to, put COVID relief payments in the accounts that COVID relief payments, deserve to be in, and not to put them in others, and not to do twice, and to eliminate fraud, of course. But the more you program money, actually, the less it becomes money. And so you want your national currency to just be able to be used everywhere. And so I think part of your question was, can they coexist? And I think the answer to that is absolutely 100%. Stable coins and CBDCs and truly programmable money will coexist, I think, and should coexist. They have slightly different use cases.
I'll give you the opportunity here because we have a question specifically about Ethereum and its dominance in the smart contracts space. And the question is, they're curious what the case for a multi-blockchain smart contract world is, and how another smart contract platform could catch up to Ethereum. And Staci, if you want to start with that, and Pedro, if you have any thoughts, feel free to share as well.
Sure. Look, Vitalik Buterin is the most important person in crypto after Satoshi Nakamoto, for sure, right? And Ethereum was the first to come along and to have this idea of programmable money, which is revolutionary. I do think, though, that as time has gone by, better solutions have come along. And Algorand is, I think, an example of that, where you can have such quick transaction speeds, such fast finality, and such low transaction fees, and such a non-existent environmental footprint. I mean, the environmental footprint of Algorand is about the cost of charging a Tesla for a year, right? And the gas fees that you have on Ethereum are sub-penny on Algorand. So I think when you start, I think competition is good. I think we've learned a lot from Ethereum, and I think the smart contract environment in particular on Algorand, it's built into the layer 1. So you don't have to have these layer 2 solutions that Ethereum has that give it better scalability, give it better speed, because that stuff is built into our layer 1. But part of the reason that we were able to build such an elegant consensus mechanism, and when I say we, I mean the smarties over in Boston. I am not taking any personal credit for this myself, of course, but part of the reason that they were able to build such an elegant machine and such an elegant consensus mechanism is, of course, in large part due to the learnings from watching Ethereum and watching the evolution of Ethereum. So I say this with a tremendous amount of respect, of course, for what they're doing.
Pedro, I know you guys have done a lot of thinking around kind of how the so-called smart contract wars will play out over time. So I don't know if you want to share maybe a few thoughts as well.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think the addressable market's so big that the real world problems that can be solved with this technology are so vast that there are rooms for several players at the same time. They're going to find their niches, right? Their use cases, and different use cases have different blockchain needs, in terms of transaction per second or finality, as Staci was saying, or sometimes and some use cases don't need blockchain, right? So they just need, maybe a once a day, settlement on the blockchain. There are several use cases, and specialization is going to happen, and that's what I think. Where Algorand is, and they're finding their way. And I'm curious actually to hear from Staci, if I may, Gerry. What are the big problems that she has to solve, in order for the Algorand, ecosystem thrive. I know she's spoken about this in other occasions publicly, and she's taking a business approach to this. We need to help, the ecosystem. We need to help the users, the developers, and I'm curious to listen from her. What are the initiatives that she's taking in order for Algorand to become more widely used, and a lot of developers, committing time and capital and resources to developing on the Algorand blockchain.
Yeah, 100%. I will just say, to your first point to begin, though, Silvio does talk about a fable, kind of a fable. He's Italian, so he talks about the city-state of Venice and spent hundreds and hundreds of years like battling Greek islands, when he could have just looked over its shoulder, and there's a whole continent of Europe behind it that it could have, conquered and taken over and made a lot of money from. And I feel that's the same thing when people are kind of instigating, fights with what's better, Solana or Algorand or Cardano or whatever. It's like there's plenty of room and plenty of things to do for all of these layer 1. So I completely agree with you there. At the foundation, we have our strategic orientation, I would say, is two things. One, I call it kind of a top down, and the other is a bottom up. And the bottom up is what I call a kind of Planet Algorand strategy. So we try to make Planet Algorand the best planet for building and developing and with the most engaged citizens and the best community that we possibly can. So what is our job at the foundation? It's to make the infrastructure, the roads and the schools and the bridges and the utilities as good as we possibly can to make sure that Planet Algorand is flourishing. And that means happy developers. That means good concierge level DevRel when they have problems. That means an easy programming language. So by the end of the year, we will be able to program entirely in Python on Algorand. So you don't need to know, some kind of crazy Web3 language, right? And all of those Web2 living up in Europe, all those Web2 Python developers can just easily bring their creativity to Algorand. We've got to make sure that the community is engaged. So that's the kind of thing. And when we have money as well, give away. Now, as part of our decentralization, we are having the community decide on the grants program to support protocols. But even there, we try to make sure that we're supporting winners and we're supporting the protocols that have the wherewithal to grow and be self-sustaining eventually, right? So I think the era of kind of easy internet money is over. It was kind of over even when I arrived, but we try to support protocols that can help themselves, and we increasingly push that decision making out to the community, I would say. And then the top down strategy is just finding partnerships that don't really, they just want to do something better. They're not in Web3. They don't care. They want to engage with their fans more. They want to make payments in a better way. They want to, they have identity solutions that they need to solve. And we partner with those and introduce them to Algorand and help them build their solutions on Algorand. So those are the kind of the two big buckets that we focus on. You're making me think of a couple of other examples I'd love to give you, but I won't abuse my time in the spotlight.
No, I was going to say we have time for one more question, and we have a handful left, and I hate to cherry pick questions, but I think this one's good because it kind of gets at the theme of this discussion. And the question is around in the early years of the internet, there was also a promise for decentralization, but we didn't see that in Web 2. Is there a risk that with Web 3 that there will become a much more kind of centralized infrastructure going forward?
I think there's absolutely that risk. I think people naturally centralize. People naturally want to take power and control. And I think we all as a community have to be vigilant against that. This is why, competition on layer ones is good. And this is why community engagement is good. And this is why multiple protocols doing the same thing are good. Yeah, but I think it's something that we all have to continue to be concerned about for sure.
Great. Honestly, I think that's about as good a place to end as we could ask for. So thank you again, Staci, for your time. I'm sure we'll have many more discussions going forward about this. And Pedro, as always, thanks for joining and sharing your insights. So for those that are listening, I was just going to add, we do have Pedro and his team produce a lot of research on this topic and others that you can find on our website under our.
Don't miss it.
Don't miss it. Thank you. And Staci, if there's anything in terms of what our folks should be looking for from Algorand or resources, feel free to share that here now as well.
100%. Just I mostly communicate with people on Twitter, Staci W_DC. And also though, if any of your clients want to reach out, please give them my, it's Staci, Staci @algorand.foundation. I'm happy to engage in any kind of conversation that you want around the Algorand protocol. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here.
Of course. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Staci.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jen.
Pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.